I will call the State Government Finance January 16th, 2025 meeting to order. Quorum is present, and we are going to go first through member and staff introductions. Just kind of tell us a little bit about yourself, tell us how long you've been a member, and for staff, you can skip over how many years you've been here if you choose. But I'm Chair Jim Nash. This is my 6th term. I have been on this committee for now 11 years straight, no interruptions. I might get a trophy or a cookie for that, I'm not sure. But I truly believe that State Government Finance is a very good and vital committee. It has a broad jurisdiction, and it's a great place to be. So if we can, let's go all the way down to Chair Anderson. We'll work our way up, and then we'll cover staff after that as well.
Flip the mic on. Good morning, everybody. I'm Paul Anderson. This is my 9th term, and I have not been on this committee for a long time. I think my first term here in 09 and 10, I served with Tom Emmer and Marty Seifert on this committee, so that goes back a ways. I live out south of Alexandria. I'm a farmer and serve 12A is my district, most of 5 counties out to the South Dakota border. So good to be here and want to take part in the committee, so thanks.
Good morning. My name is John Kosnick, state representative from living in Lakeville, representing Lakeville, or half of Lakeville, Elko, Newmarket, Credit River, and the townships of Eureka and Newmarket Township. This is, I think, starting my 5th year or session on this committee. Kind of took a departure from transportation for a couple of years, but they wouldn't let me leave. But I enjoy the committee. It's a broad base of topics. It is important, Mr. Chair. I agree with you. I'd like to dive into a little bit of the Met Council type stuff, being in the Metro. And I'm happy to be here.
Morning, everybody. I represent Jim Joy out of 4B, which is Clay County, Becker County, part of Becker County. Live in Hawley. Was a former mayor, so I like local control. So the state government, this is my 2nd term, and I served in it the 1st term. So I'm happy to be here and look forward to getting to work on our stuff. Thank you.
Good morning. I'm Tom Sexton. I'm a freshman. This is actually my 2nd opportunity to be a state employee. My high school job was working in the parking lots of the state of Minnesota Zoo in Apple Valley. So that goes back to 1979, so I probably am a little senior on that side than most people in the room. Served 26 and a half years in the Air Force, retired as a colonel, started working in the pipeline industry up in Duluth at Enbridge when we moved back to Minnesota, and then took a job down in Houston, Texas, a little more senior position. So came back, retired, and got called back to serve all the people in Minnesota.
Hi, I'm Dwayne Quam, 8th term, and I think it's 4 or 5 that I've been on committee with this jurisdiction, and my real jobs have been in semiconductors and computers and the tech field and project program management, so I'm hoping to bring a little bit of the efficiency and effectiveness to our agencies.
Hi, everybody. My name is Jacob Grunhauser. I am the GOP Committee Administrator this year, and I've been with the House for 5 years now.
My name is Allie Winter. I'm the Committee Legislative Assistant, and I've been with the House for 3.5 years.
I'm Helen Roberts. I'm the Nonpartisan Fiscal Analyst, and I've staffed this committee since the 1997 session.
Good morning, Mr. Chair and members. I'm Colby Sullivan with the Nonpartisan House Research Department. I've been with House Research for 19 years. This is my 20th legislative session, but my first time staffing this committee. So happy to be here. I staffed Chair Anderson's Ag Committee throughout my career so far, and I've also been staffed to the Ways and Means Committee for a little over 10 years.
My name is Justin Brill. I'm the GOP partisan researcher, and I've been with the House since January of 2021.
And then if we could have our pages stand up and introduce themselves. They are very much an important part of what we do here, so we appreciate your being here for an early morning committee, but if you'd stand up and introduce yourself.
My name is Joe Schatz. This is my third year as a page.
And I'm Earl Wilson. This is my first year as a page. Look forward to working with you.
Welcome. All right, so members, in your packet, we have our committee rules that will be, I think we'll be posting after this, but a little bit on the rules. This is sort of an amalgamation or mashup of the rules that were under my first term from Chair Sarah Anderson, and then a little bit of Chair Cleavorn's rules from the last 2 years. Very straightforward stuff, but these will be the rules for our committee, and we don't have to vote on those, so we're just going to keep moving. But those are your rules. We're going to do a couple of walkthroughs today, and we've got nonpartisan staff, and then we have Office of the Legislative Auditor. So I'm going to have our nonpartisan staff go first to give sort of a walkthrough. But before we do that, I want to talk a little bit about my expectations on the interaction with nonpartisan staff here in our committee. And I've said this to a number of members, and I've said this over the 10, 11 years that I've been here. Nonpartisan staff is here to help us. They are here to provide information for us. They are probably the most well-versed people that you're ever going to need in this committee, and you are going to need them. At no time ever are questions going to be asked of them that are of a political nature. They are not here to make our political points for us. We are in an inherently political environment, but they are not part of that. So if a question is asked of them that is of a political nature, I'm just going to ask them not to answer it, and we'll keep moving to the next question. I think that is the most professional thing that we should do for them, and out of respect for their offices, that's how we're going to do it. So starting off, Helen Roberts from House Fiscal, if you would. Yeah, if you'd like to take the testifiers table. So, and as she's walking up there, Helen has been a great resource all the way back when I was a freshman and had a gazillion questions. And always has the answers, and if she doesn't have the answers, she gets them within a matter of a short period of time. So, Ms. Roberts says she's looking for buttons.
I think this is on. Can you
You
hear
are
me?
on.
Okay, thank you.
All right, Ms. Roberts, to you.
Mr. Chair and members, again, I'm Helen Roberts from the Nonpartisan Fiscal Analysis Department, and like House Research, we serve all members of the House. You should have a handout in your packet that starts with a pie chart. And I'm going to do a very, very high-level overview of the accounts and funding in this committee. So please know that, again, this is really high level, but I can always get you additional information, and I'm willing to meet with any members or groups that want to walk through things in more detail. So I should begin by saying that the House State Government Committee appropriates funding for and oversees the operations of many, many state agencies, boards, and councils, and also the legislature and the constitutional offices. The State Government Finance General Fund appropriation makes up less than 2% of the state's overall general fund budget. And I also want to note that the State Government Finance Committee, despite its name, does not fund all state agency operations. That sometimes causes a little confusion. However, the agencies that are funded through this committee include all of the major sort of administrative staff agencies, meaning Department of Revenue, Administration, Minute Services, and Minnesota Management and Budget. And these agencies provide the basic infrastructure for state agency operations. So again, I'm going to start by doing a really high-level overview of the general fund. So that's the first pie chart that you're going to see. And this is a really quick look at how the general fund base is distributed among the various state government agencies. And you'll see that the base for fiscal year 26 and 27, based on the November forecast, is $1.31 billion. And again, this is less than 2% of the overall general fund spending. This is the number in particular for our new member that, as it will be adjusted by the February forecast, will provide the starting point for discussions about what the target for this committee. And you'll note, looking at the pie chart, that the three largest general fund agencies and accounts in this committee are the Department of Revenue, the legislature, and then the various pension aids that are made directly to some of the statewide pension plans. That includes MSRS for a certain program for former legislators and constitutional offices, TRA and PRA. And again, I can answer questions about that if you need more information. We also have a pension commission that gets very much into the detail of these pension funds. So these just three make up about 60% of the general fund base. The committee, I'd also note that the committee does have jurisdiction over the Department of Revenue's operating budget. The tax committee focuses on tax policy, and they often will make appropriations to the Department of Revenue in the omnibus tax bill. But all of the operating funds eventually come back and are dealt with by this committee. And then moving on, after the pie chart, you're going to see probably the highest level spreadsheet you're ever going to see on this committee, which is just breaking down the November forecast general fund base. And then I've grouped it into some sort of groupings that give you an idea of what this committee deals with. Again, the legislature, the constitutional offices, those executive branch major agencies, and then you'll see that there's quite a few smaller boards and commissions, including the ethnic councils. There's a group of occupational licensing boards, the retirement fund aids, and then some quasi-state agencies, including the Historical Society and the Humanities Commission. And then I've also noted the public broadcasting grants that go through this committee. Those actually flow through the Department of Administration, but I just wanted to break them out so that you know that's a part of this committee's jurisdiction also. The next pie chart then looks at the all funds view. So as members know that we tend to focus on the general fund when we talk about targets and trying to reach a balanced budget, but the all funds view will show you really a different picture of what this committee has to deal with. And that's because we have several agencies that provide services to other state agencies and other entities through internal service funds or fees for service. And you'll note, looking at this pie chart, that all of a sudden minute services becomes a much bigger piece of the pie, and that's because of all of the IT services that they provide to state agencies through their minute services fund. Technically, I just want to note that all of these come from what we call the consolidated fund statement. So this pie chart doesn't even necessarily capture the whole universe of non-general fund activity, because when we start to get into internal service funds, there's a lot of double counting going on. So I've tried to just stick to the easiest presentation. But then as we move on, you'll see after that pie chart, I have a list of just some of the internal service funds that aren't included in the previous chart. You'll see that there are many within the Department of Administration. That department provides a lot of different services to state agencies, including, for example, all of the real estate and facilities management on the Capitol complex. They manage fleet services, surplus property. If you have been involved with a local government, you know that local governments also can use that service in their cooperative purchasing. They provide the risk management or insurance for the state. So all of those things are dealt with through internal service funds. Again, there's minute services. MMB manages the State Employee Insurance Fund and the Public Employees Insurance Program. So all of that funding flows through MMB in the form of both employer and employee contributions or premiums. So that's, again, an issue that if there is discussion would happen probably in this committee. And then I just noted some other examples. We have the state auditor that gets reimbursed by local governments for their audit activities. The governor's office that has some interagency billings with state agencies. That is something that changed a bit in the 2023 session. So if you have further questions on that, I can provide additional detail. The Attorney General, in addition to their general fund appropriations, has what we call partner agencies with some of the larger agencies. So the funding actually would go to another agency, and then they enter into an agreement with the Attorney General to provide services, administrative hearings, which we may have some discussion about, provide services to state agencies through their administrative law judges. And then another example is the Investment Board, State Board of Investment, or SBI, which their expenses are assessed against the various funds that they invest for the state. And so that's a really quick overview. The last page just talks about sources of information on agency budgets. The first link is a link to the Minnesota Management and Budget pages. So in the fall of every budget preceding a budget year, MNB produces what we call the agency profiles and the base budget pages. These are a great source of information if you're like a starting point if you want to learn about an agency. The agency profiles will tell you a bit about what the agency mission is, how they're funded, what their major activities are, and then you can look at how, at a very high level, how their funding is broken down. In addition to that, I have access, and all of the fiscal staff have access to what we call the BPAS, or the budget planning system, and we have additional layers of detail that we can provide to you. So if you have an interest in any particular agency or issue, we can use that system to provide additional information on the budget. We also have access to what is called SWIFT, or the state accounting system. So that's the current system. So SWIFT looks back. So if you're looking for history on spending, we also have some access to additional information through that system. I've noted that I think there's a link to my department's tracking sheets. As we move through this process, all of the fiscal analysts are producing much more detailed tracking sheets for all of the committees. And so we're continually trying to update that. We're now kind of in the process of waiting for the governor's recs. That's the next step, and we'll add those to our tracking sheet. And again, if anybody wants me to sit down with them and walk them through that, our detailed tracking sheet, I think as the chair knows, is about 30 pages, so it can take a long time to walk through, but there is a lot of information in there if you want more detail. And then finally, I do have a link to the OLA reports. I know they're up next or later in the day, and that's, again, I would say a great starting point if you want to learn about an agency, to go back and look at those reports, both their financial audits and their program evaluations. And that's what I have, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Roberts. And you're located in the Centennial Office Building, as are we, and would encourage members to reach out either through Mr. Brill or Mr. Grunhauser. Helen has always been super available and enjoys talking numbers with the best of them. So I think that it's a great resource that I want to encourage each of you to use. So, Chair Quam, do you have a question?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, and this would be, get back later with the information. The House has twice the legislators of the Senate, and the House's budget, as listed in your tables, is 10.75% greater. It'd be nice to understand what we as a body, how we use our money and what it's spent on in the Senate, and that might give us some perspective with agencies. And that's just to ask for a little bit of information. Thank you.
Ms. Roberts.
Mr. Chair and Representative Quam, certainly I can get you some additional information on the House and Senate budgets. Those are both approved by the respective rules committees. So we probably would need to wait for some detailed information going forward on that. One thing I will note on the Senate is the Senate budget includes the debt service on their new building. So that makes their number look larger than you might think it should compared to the House. The House rent at this point is funded through what we call the in lieu of rent payment, and that's an appropriation that flows through the Department of Administration. So that's part of the reason that it doesn't maybe look the way you might think it should.
Chairman Quam.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It might be interesting to understand then when we start paying on the debt for the project on the SOB, what that quantity of debt would show on our budget. Thank you.
Roberts.
Mr. Chair and members, I do have this broken out. So currently the debt service on the certificates of participation for the SOB renovation and expansion. And also the open appropriation related to all of the move costs to move to Centennial are on page 2. If you look under executive branch agencies, I have that broken out as capital area building costs under Department of Administration. Those costs actually show up in the Department of Administration line, and I did want to break those out so there's no confusion that that's part of admin's operating budget. But again, I can get more information on that if you need it.
Chair Quam, anything further? Any other questions? Chairman Anderson.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. And if I missed this, I apologize, but a lot of numbers here, big numbers. Talking a second about Minute and their budget being over $1 billion. And in the next page, there's internal billing of about 524 million. Is that income coming into them for charges that they provide for services to other agencies, or how is that tracked?
Ms. Roberts.
Correct, Mr. Chair and Representative Anderson. Minute provides the IT services to the executive branch through a fee for service. And they have a distinct or a separate fund for that. That's called the Minute Services. I'll have to look up the exact name, but we call it the Minute Fund. And so most of their operations are not on the general fund. They're funded through this internal service fund. And that's, again, sort of why I do the general fund versus the all funds breakout, to show you that Minute is really a much bigger player in terms of the funds under the jurisdiction of this committee.
Chairman Anderson.
Thanks again, Mr. Chair. So just to be clear, the Minute Services Fund actually is revenue?
Ms. Roberts.
Mr. Chair and Representative Anderson, it would be revenue that would be collected by Minute to pay for their expenses that they provide to the various agencies. And we do have access to, and I think I forwarded this to the chair and the committee administrator, Minute does a rate package every 2 years where they provide additional detail on what all of those fees would be for state agencies. It's pretty detailed. It's probably, I'm not an IT person, so a lot of it's probably above my head, but if you're interested in that, there is some narrative at the beginning of the rate package that explains what they do, and that might be useful to members if they're interested in that agency specifically.
And I'll follow up, Chair Anderson. So Minute provides IT services, but not for everybody, which is a little counterintuitive at times. So not everybody that is a state agency board or whatever is using the Minute services. We may fix that, but I think it's interesting to note how they charge back. So it's effectively, like Ms. Roberts said, there's a rate card that says, here's how much we're going to charge you to be on our wire and to receive our services and to participate in the cybersecurity efforts that they undertake. And it gets charged back to that particular agency, but ultimately the money comes from the taxpayer. So we're gonna be diving into that and asking some interesting questions, and it will be animated, I'm sure. But at a later date, we'll have Minute in to explain how they do things. But it's a convoluted way to do things in many ways, but it's a very good question. Anybody else? Further questions? All right, Ms. Roberts, thank you so much. And again, members, if you have questions, Ms. Roberts is super available. Mr. Sullivan, if you would. Mr. Sullivan, if you would, introduce yourself for the record and then proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members. Colby Sullivan with the Nonpartisan House Research Department. No surprise, my counterpart, Ms. Roberts, did a fantastic job of kind of summarizing the committee and its jurisdiction. What I have to offer is, it should be in your packets. It's a memorandum dated yesterday to members of the committee. From me, this is an updated version of the memo that my predecessor as the HRD staffer for State Gov, Mr. Matt Gehring, used to provide to the committee. It provides a short description of each of the entities within the committee's jurisdiction, as well as the constitutional provisions and statutory sections that govern their work. I don't want to go through it in detail. I hope this document sort of stands on its own as a helpful summary, an introduction to each of these agencies. Like Ms. Roberts, I would ask that, if you have questions about particular agencies, please reach out to me. Helen and I are co-located. Our offices are on 3rd Northwest COB, so I'm sure I'll be asking her a lot of questions as I learn the area as well. But between the two of us, we will get you an answer and get back to you as soon as we can. Just a note, too, about the jurisdiction. I think Ms. Roberts' table on page 3 of her handout is a really helpful way. Actually, it starts on page 2, where she sort of groups the different entities by category. As I'm learning the area, I find it very helpful to kind of classify these various organizations into different categories. Just a couple of notes on page 2 of Ms. Roberts' handout. The legislature, as she mentioned, it's not only the House and the Senate, but it's also the Legislative Coordinating Commission that's within this committee's jurisdiction. And the LCC is responsible for coordinating legislative activities between the House and Senate. I would note that the chair of the LCC switches every 2 years, and for 25-26, the chair of the LCC is the Speaker of the House. The LCC also then oversees the joint offices that many of you are familiar with, including, but certainly not limited to, the Legislative Auditor, the Legislative Reference Library, and the Reviser of Statutes. Jumping down then under constitutional officers, Secretary of State, my understanding is that while the Secretary of State is one of their duties is to oversee the administration of elections in the state, elections issues will be within the jurisdiction of Representative Quam's Elections Committee, whereas this committee has jurisdiction over the office's budget generally, as well as the other services that the office provides, business registrations, overseeing notaries public, and other duties such as those listed in the handout that I provided. Final note about jurisdiction is they're not listed on Ms. Roberts' handout, but the committee also has jurisdiction over 3 gambling agencies for the State Lottery, the Racing Commission, and the Gambling Control Board. Would just note that while this committee has jurisdiction over their operating budgets, typically within the House, gambling issues are within the jurisdiction of the Commerce Committee. That's gambling policy. So just a note, too, about maybe how the jurisdictions split between committees in that area as well. That, Mr. Chair, just closed by encouraging members to reach out to me for your bill drafting and amendment needs. That's what I do, and I'm very happy to help, so please don't hesitate to reach out.
Thank you, Mr. Sullivan. Any questions? Chair Quam.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. If you've got a soft copy of this that had links, when you're referencing Article 4 and Chapter 3, that had links, that might be assistive to the newer members. Thank you.
I'll be happy to provide that to the committee.
Okay. Any other questions for Mr. Sullivan? All right, well, thank you very much. Next, we will ask the Office of the Legislative Auditor to make their way to the podium. I know that they've got some IT stuff to either hook up or get going. We've got staff here, if we can get that prepared. And that will display on the televisions on the side of the testifier table. And as they're doing that, would anybody like to share some show tunes or maybe like an interpretive dance? No? No. All right. It is too early. I agree. But fortunately, they've got their presentation up, so we don't have to worry about that. But so, Office of the Legislative Auditor there's a lot of chairs. There's 4 chairmen in this on this committee right now. So a lot of us have had a lot of interaction. But for our new member and returning member, OLA is a fantastic organization that is also nonpartisan. And today they are here to make some presentations, but answer some questions, make themselves available. So I will ask testifiers to introduce themselves, and Madam Auditor, we'll start with you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members. For the record, my name is Judy Randall, Legislative Auditor. Thank you for inviting me to speak with you today. As Mr. Chair said, we're going to provide an overview of our office, just the high-level stuff so you can get an understanding of what we do. And then we are going to do a deep dive into a performance audit we released in November related to the Minnesota State Lottery. And I understand you all have copies of it, but we have hardbound copies of the report out there if you're interested in those as well. So the first thing I want to talk about is that we are nonpartisan, as Mr. Chair said. One difference between OLA and the roles Ms. Roberts and Mr. Sullivan play is that we serve the entire legislature. So we are a joint legislative office. We serve the entire legislative branch, the House and the Senate, all 201 members. As we've established, we are nonpartisan. That is really important to the role of our office. We take that very seriously. At the end of the day, what OLA has is its integrity and credibility, and that relies on us not just being nonpartisan, but being perceived as nonpartisan. I do want to note that, again, we work for all 201 members. We respond to requests from all members at any time of the year, during session, outside of session, in the summer, anytime. We are available for you. We are your full-time oversight and accountability folks. That's really what we do. And we support accountability and transparency in any public forum, whether it's here in the Capitol or whether it's out meeting with other folks. So I just want to be really clear about our role.
And Ms. Randall, if you would, for new members, sometimes it gets very confusing as to we have auditors that are here at the state. We have both yourself, legislative auditor, and then we have the state auditor. If you just give a very quick, high-level overview about what are the appreciable differences between your role and the state auditor, just because it's confusing at times, and I remember being a freshman and being confused as to, looks like we have a lot of auditors hanging out, and you don't do the same thing, so if you would.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Great question, and especially this committee has jurisdiction over both sets of auditors, so it's good to understand the difference. So we are the legislative auditor. We work on behalf of the legislature and behalf of the public. We have oversight, and we'll get into our authority and jurisdiction, but we focus on state funds. So legislative auditor, state funds. Okay, I didn't come up with the names. I just want to be clear. They very much predate me. Okay, so legislative auditor, state funds. State auditor, county, local funds. So again, I didn't name them, but so OLA, and I will get into more of what we do. We do financial audits, we do program evaluations, we do special reviews. We provide kind of an umbrella of oversight related to state funds. And the state auditor has some special review focus, but they mostly do financial audits and again, related to local governments. So that's the other thing I will say is that the state auditor is a constitutional officer, is an elected position. The legislative auditor, me, is appointed to a term by the Legislative Audit Commission. And again, I'll get into that as well. So there's a number of differences. So thank you, Mr. Chair, for asking about that. I appreciate that. Just kind of getting back to kind of some of our core things, in addition to being nonpartisan, we are independent. And that independence takes several different forms. First of all, while we're in the legislative branch, we're also somewhat independent from all of you. At the end of the day, our reports are the product of our office. They are not approved by anybody. They're not approved by legislators. They're not approved by the auditee. We do allow them to review and comment. That's a standard practice in auditing. But again, we are independent. Some of that independence also is baked into our structure. As I mentioned, the legislative auditor is appointed to a 6-year term. The vast majority of our staff are in classified positions. So that is different than almost all other legislative staff. That allows us to report what we find, which is really, at the end of the day, what we do. We are about the data, the evidence, and our standards as auditors. And so if we report something that an individual legislator might not like, if that's what the facts say, that's what we do. And so having that structural independence provides us that protection of acting in the best interests of the state and the oversight over taxpayer dollars.
And just very quickly on that, to support what was just said by Ms. Randall, very often legislators will see something and get very fired up and they want to go do something amazing and they would like the OLA to help. Very often, and I speak from experience, you may wind up being disillusioned when what you think is out there may not actually be out there. So it's a very good thing that the OLA does. Will sometimes say, yeah, you know, that's not exactly how it's shaken out, Representative so-and-so. So just wanted to throw that in there as well.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And while you say disillusioned, I say happy things are working well because honestly, that's our goal, right? Our goal, you know, we're not partisan. I'd say our one bias is that we want good government. That is what we care about. We just want things to work and work as well and effectively as they can. And that's the lens we bring to the work we do. So the other way we are independent, I'll just say one more thing, is that is a really fundamental part of being auditors. And so we're in the legislative branch and we audit folks outside of the legislative branch. So there's structural independence as an organization, and then also for each independent auditor, we go through independence questionnaires, ensure that there's no internal conflicts of interest or anything, and if somebody's, you know, sister-in-law works somewhere, we just remove them from that project, right? So there's a lot of layers of independence. We take it very seriously. And at the end of the day, we are, you know, some people would say the watchdog over public funds. Again, we're kind of your year-round accountability and oversight body when you either aren't here or when you have lots of other things on your plate. So here you see just a very high-level overview of our structure. So legislative auditor is me. I'm just halfway through my first term as legislative auditor, but I'll note that I have been with the office for more than 25 years. So we won't dwell on that, but it is true. I think I started maybe a year after Ms. Roberts. Okay, so we have three report producing divisions is what I would say. Not reflected on this slide, and really it's an oversight on my part, is our amazing support staff. That's our IT staff, our general counsel, our HR folks, and our support staff. But here you see our three key divisions. So seated beside me here is Lori Lyson. She is the Deputy Legislative Auditor for the Financial Audit Division, and I'll talk a little bit more about what each division does. Seated there in matching shirt is Ms. Jody Rodriguez. So Judy is tough, but she's our Deputy Legislative Auditor for the Program Evaluation Division. We'll talk more about what that does. And then seated next to her is Ms. Catherine Tyson. She's our Director of our Special Reviews Unit. So in all, we have about 72 staff. We are at full complement right now, which is excellent. And the three different areas that we are sharing here today represent kind of different levels and types of oversight and accountability. And they're all important and they all work together. And so I think it's important just to spend a little bit of time on what these differences are and what we do. So I'm going to start just with the financial audit division. You know, you hear audit, you think CPAs, you think financial auditors, and that is true for the financial audit division. They, for about 5 months out of the year, focus on auditing the state's financial statements. So they just issued an opinion in December on the state's financial statements. The rest of the year, they conduct what are called performance audits, and that's what the lottery audit report is that we'll talk about. Sometimes they include IT audits, which is also part of the lottery. They're focusing on internal controls, compliance with financial related legal requirements. I've been using this metaphor. I'm still working out the kinks, but I think it works, so bear with me. I was thinking about a barn, okay, because sometimes we're talking about the horses, you know, closing the barn door after the horse has gotten out, right? So thinking about the barn and having horses in it, I think of the work the internal controls group or the financial audit division does with the internal controls as kind of walking around the barn, checking the locks, finding, oh, you know, this door is kind of ajar. Before it swings wide open, let's tighten up those hinges. Oh, this window is loose, right? So all of these things, sometimes I think folks might feel it's a little nitpicky, but the idea is to catch it when it's just a little bit ajar, right? Before the door swings wide open. And pointing out, oh, that roof getting old, right? So those types of things. It's like all those good governance, good management things. That's really the wheelhouse of the financial audit division. Okay, moving now to the, and remember, keep the barn in mind. Okay, moving now to the program evaluation division. This group does about 5 or 6 evaluations a year, and they're looking more at the effectiveness of programs. Are we getting the bang for the buck? Is the program that the legislature established, is it producing what we wanted it to establish? Oftentimes, these reports, I should have said financial audit reports often make recommendations back to the agency. Tighten up your controls, comply with the law, things like that. The program evaluation division might also identify some compliance stuff, but they're also looking at the laws. Are the laws structured in a way that the program is going to deliver what you all want it to deliver? Is it a good way to organize the program? How do other states do it? How do, just all sorts of different research methods. So if you think back to the barn metaphor, which again, I'm leaning into, and somebody should probably stop me. They might look and be like, the barn on the outside is okay, but like there's all these chicken coops in here, right? So we can't really fit a lot of horses in here. Or, well, we're feeding the horses pretty crummy hay. If we really want them to be good horses, I don't know. I'm not a farmer, sorry. But you know what I mean, right? Like, it's like, how do we make this work better? How do we make the barn work better? How do we get the best horses? How can we make these programs more effective? Okay.
We can have Chair Anderson chime in when needed.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Representative Anderson, I'll take your advice at any moment. I think I've gone off the rails a little bit. My apologies. The final area is the special reviews unit. And this is a small but growing unit within OLA that has unfortunately gotten more and more necessary. You also might have in your packets this one-pager, and it's a 2024 annual report for the Special Reviews Unit. I just provide that for you to give you some more information on how that unit has grown, especially over the last couple years. So the Special Reviews Unit is looks into specific concerns, specific allegations. So those folks go, it's like narrow but deep, often based on a complaint, an allegation, a whistleblower. So this is, the farmhand calls us and says, oh my gosh, I came in this morning and the back door was wide open and the horse is gone, right? That's kind of, that's the metaphor there. Or it could be, the door is wide open, I'm worried the horse is going to get out. Can you guys come take a look? So there's different variations of how things are notified, how we receive notifications. We have an allegation form on our website. Folks can submit concerns anonymously, or we can protect their identity. So that's really high level of the different types of work we do. Again, all of those are different layers and levels of accountability and oversight to make sure that public funds are used properly.
Madam Auditor, if you would, you mentioned the term whistleblower. Can you talk about the provisions that your office enjoys with whistleblowers and how all that would work if someone from the state of Minnesota employee came to you with something that would be construed as whistleblowing?
Absolutely. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So anybody, not just a state employee, anybody can come to us, and we have the ability to protect their identity under our statutes. And they can share information with us. We will protect it. We are subject to the Minnesota Government Data Practices Act. We take that very seriously. We also have the ability to access data of any classification that other agencies receive. So if we have a whistleblower who comes to us, so first of all, people can submit complaints and concerns anonymously, right? We have a website, we have a phone number, we have ways for people to reach us if they really don't want to tell us who they are. It works a lot better if they will share their identity with us, because we almost always, not almost always, we always have follow-up questions. And so it really helps us to be able to reach back out and contact them. We then will classify their identity as not public. It's not just their name either. If it's something that only they would uniquely know, right, that could also tip off their identity, or it's a catchphrase they use, or what. So we're very careful in the type of information we would disclose. But what we do then is use that information to start asking some questions. And again, because we have such broad authority and we get information from lots of folks, including our own work and our own research that we're doing all the time in state agencies, we then can start following up with agencies or with programs and ask additional questions. And that whistleblower's name never has to be associated with it. There are obligations for public employees to report suspected misuse of public funds to us, and we expect that to happen as well. So we do receive a number of reports and allegations and concerns, but we do think there's probably more that folks can be reporting to us, so we encourage that. Thank you. So this is our mission and our goals, and I think we've probably talked about them a bit. So strengthen legislative oversight and accountability in government. That says it all. I've already talked about the barn and different types of oversight, so I won't keep going there. But we're also interested in promoting good management and enhancing program effectiveness. So we're not just about, fraud, waste, and abuse, which I know is a big area of interest. It's always an area of interest for us, but we're also interested in program effectiveness. Are things working as well as they could be? And if not, how can we improve them? And then finally, our goal is to produce reports that are accurate, objective, timely, and useful. At the end of the day, that's what it's about. Accuracy, I mean, if I tell you the lengths we go to ensure that every report we produce is accurate, you would glaze over in terms of the level of detail we go and the double and triple checking. But that, at the end of the day, is really the most important thing, along with being objective. And we achieve that objectiveness in multiple ways. Again, I talked earlier about our independence structurally and as individuals within the office. But then we also have reports go through multiple reviews. We have the auditees review it. And we really, again, at the end of the day, what we want are things to work well. And that's our goal. And we know that that is achieved when our reports are credible, which means they're accurate, objective, and hopefully they come out at the right time. Okay, so talking a little bit about oversight of us, there is a Legislative Audit Commission. Representative Quam has been on it for a long time, and we are glad for that. The Audit Commission is made up of 12 members, and it is equally divided among the caucuses. So 3 members from each caucus, regardless of who has a majority in which body or anything. It is always 3 members from each caucus. The chair rotates between the House and the Senate every 2 years, and it really operates in a bipartisan way. I think Representative Quam could also speak to that, but it's really, I think, impressive how seriously folks on the commission take, again, the idea of accountability and oversight in good government. The Legislative Audit Commission, in addition to receiving a number of our reports, we often will present them to the commission. They appoint the legislative auditor to the 6-year term, so we talked about that already. And then they also select the program evaluation topics that we conduct each year. And that's something that members who have been around for a while may remember, the survey that comes out to get your interest on different topics that are proposed. So that is an important piece of how they select the topics. Also, I'll just note in about 2 weeks or so, we're going to start sending out notices to all members asking for your suggestions for evaluation topics. So that is always something that we look forward to receiving. And again, anything that receives state money is fair game. We only ask that when you suggest your topics that, don't write the Department of blank. That's too big for us, right? Try to narrow it in on a program or some specific questions. That would be great. Okay, so I talked a little bit already about our work products. We do the audit of the state's financial statements. We conduct the performance audits, again, the internal controls. We do some IT audits. Sometimes those are rolled in with our performance audits, as you will see with the lottery report we're about to discuss, the program evaluations that we talked about, and then the special reviews. And special reviews, I'll just say, really run the gamut in terms of some bigger reports, like the oversight of Feeding Our Future that we released this summer. But we also do a number of kind of smaller 10-page memo things following up on specific questions and getting additional information. Our jurisdiction is, as I said before, kind of anywhere state money goes, which is actually a lot of places. So we are the auditor of the executive branch. That includes the constitutional officers. We are just wrapping up an audit of the Office of the State Auditor right now. So we are the auditor for the other auditor, if you followed that. And we're kicking off an audit of the governor's office just now. Also audit all the boards and commissions. We also have jurisdiction over the judicial branch, the University of Minnesota, Minnesota State, so higher education, public higher education. I heard Representative Kosnick talk about the Metropolitan Council. We have audit jurisdiction over metropolitan government, including others listed there. And then even all the way down to the nonprofit organization that receives a state-funded grant. So as needed, we have the authority to go down and request records and look at their information, interview them, and we have done so. So really broad jurisdiction. As I mentioned in the beginning, we have 72 staff. So we make a lot of choices as we go through in terms of how we allocate our resources. We've talked a little bit about our independence. I also want to talk about our authority. State law gives the Office of the Legislative Auditor broad authority, which is really, frankly, necessary for us to be able to do our work. The law gives us access to all documents and data, regardless of their classification. Of course, we have to protect that information, and we take that responsibility very seriously. But that allows us to get down to, the granular level, to get down to individual, medical assistance claims or individual test scores or tax returns or whatever. Of course, when we report, we sum it all up and are able to make conclusions that are then public, but it often rests upon this not public information that we have, again, access to, but absolutely responsibility to protect. The law requires all public employees to cooperate with us when we come and ask questions. And I will say 99.999% of the time folks do cooperate. If they don't, we do have the authority to issue subpoenas and get those enforced. We've talked about our ability to protect the identity of sources, and we talked about our independence in that our work is, at the end of the day, controlled by the office. So I apologize in advance, as Mr. Nash said, or Mr. Chair said, because you will not agree with all of our reports. And that's just how it goes. That's not what we're trying to do. We're just trying to state the facts. Our reports are published on our website. They are made available to anybody who's interested. We testify at hearings, and they are made public without prior legislative review. And so, again, they are not reviewed and approved by the Audit Commission. Last year, we produced 9 performance audits. So you can read here, 5 program evaluations, 2 special reviews, and then those financial statement audits. On the next slide, here are rats. I didn't want that to be white, but there it is. So maybe you can see it better on your handout. These are recent audits that are of entities that are under this committee's jurisdiction. And so, of course, we can make any of them available to you in hard copy. They're also available on our website. But, the lottery, MMB, the data warehouse, Office of the Secretary of State, the Governor, Board of Cosmetology. I also listed one here that's the oversight of state-funded grants to nonprofit organizations, because that really is relevant to every single committee, I think, in state government, and also the Department of Administration has some unique responsibilities related to the Office of Grants Management. So with that, Mr. Chair, that's the overview. If there are questions about that, happy to take them now. Otherwise, we'll just move into the lottery.
We'll go to Representative Sexton first.
Right, man, that was a fantastic overview, and I really do appreciate the work you do. So I did share my background as 26 years in the military. Do you within your office have what we used to know as the Inspector General, which was sort of someplace somebody could go if they felt pressure to report something a certain way?
Auditor Randall.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Representative Sexton, and congratulations on your election. We are not an Inspector General office.
Right.
So there are some agencies that have Inspector Generals embedded, but we are a place for anybody to come, any public employee to come if they feel pressure to do something that they don't agree with, and we do hear from
Yeah, I guess I'll get more
Representative Sexton.
specific. Thank you, sir. I'm learning this. More specific on my question. If one of your employees within your office felt like they were being forced to report something a certain way, how
Auditor
would
Randall?
they
Go ahead.
basically report that?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Representative Sexton. So internally, if there
Yes,
was something.
yes.
Thank you. Well, we have a couple of options for that. The main option would be for them to report it to the Executive Director of the Legislative Coordinating Commission,
Okay.
Michelle Urich. They're kind of an umbrella organization for the joint offices, the legislative joint offices, and so that is a reporting option for them.
Okay.
I will also just add that we are audited ourselves. We have a peer review it's a national organization of auditors, state auditors, and they come every 3 years and audit our work. And then we also had an external auditor come and audit us last year. So there are some options for that.
Okay. I'm just trying to understand the organization.
Thank you.
Representative Sexton, any further?
Yes, sir. I was particularly interested in the program effectiveness audits. Is there a backlog on the request for those, or do you feel like you have sufficient staff to keep up with those? Because we really want to make sure our legislative efforts are effective.
Madam Auditor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Representative Sexton, for the question. So I'll start by saying we have a backlog on everything.
Okay.
That's the short answer. The longer answer related to the program evaluation topics is, we ask for suggestions every year. We also get them year round, and we get suggestions not just from legislators, but from staff, from public, anybody.
Sure.
In recent years, that list has been over 100,
Okay.
and we end up doing 5 or 6.
Representative Sexton.
Do you also use any sort of contract services, or do you do everything with just your employees? I mean, do you reach out for expertise to certain people?
Madam Auditor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Representative Sexton, another good question. Most of the time we do it ourselves. There are times when we have needed, some specific expertise. If we needed an actuary, we don't have an actuary on staff. We did a program evaluation related to deer management several years back, and so we got an expert wildlife consultant to help. So there have been certain times when we do that, and that is part of the consideration that the Legislative Audit Commission thinks about when they select our topics.
Okay. Representative Sexton.
That's all I have, sir.
Okay. Any other questions? Chair Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good report here. Interesting, Ms. Randall. And I totally get the financial audit piece where you're working with numbers, and it's pretty black and white, and you do your reports. But on the evaluation piece, that to me seems a little bit more subjective. So how do you keep your people's objectivity on the straight and narrow when you do a evaluation piece on anything, for example?
Madam Auditor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Chair Anderson. Good question. So our program evaluators are, first of all, highly trained. They're kind of like social scientists. So there is a lot of data in that too. We're, pulling down a lot of, let's say, administrative data, case data, for example, and using that to analyze things like timelines and there's some compliance stuff of did the right person sign off. But what we're always doing when we do those program evaluations is looking for standards. What are the standards that we can use to judge whether a program has been effective? And honestly, one of the recommendations we often make is back to the legislature to say, you set up this program, but the goals aren't clear. What do you want to accomplish with this program? Once we have those goals in place, we then have those standards to then go look and see, is the program meeting those goals? Is the program measuring its effectiveness against those goals? So, there's responsibility by the legislature to establish standards and also by the program to establish standards. But we're always looking for those. If they don't exist, then we'll look at the national literature for best practices, perhaps. Or we'll look at other states to say, well, what are they trying to accomplish? Do they have a similar program? What are they trying to accomplish? So, it's not just Judy Randall being like, I don't really like this program, right? Like, that wouldn't happen, right? It would be, what are the standards? How are we measuring against those, how do we measure those standards? Is it even measurable? And then how are we doing? And then, as I alluded to before, we have a really intense review process where kind of at certain milestones throughout the project, I'm reviewing it, the deputy's reviewing it, another person who's in the department but not on the team is reviewing it to be like, I don't buy it, right? You said this is the finding, but I don't see the standards. Or, wait, your evidence is much stronger than this. You're finding it. So we have internal review. Anyways, I could go on, but hopefully that answers your question. Okay.
Chair Anderson? All right. Anybody else? So before we dive into the lottery review, I just wanted to point out that we did invite the lottery to attend. They declined. Then we will get apparently a response from them in a letter sometime, hopefully soon. So, Madam Auditor, to the lottery review.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members. And I'm going to turn to Ms. Lyson to walk us through the findings and recommendations of that report. Thank you.
Good morning, welcome. And introduce yourself for the record and jump in.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members. For the record, my name is Lori Lyson. I'm the Deputy Legislative Auditor for the Financial Audit Division. And today I'm going to cover the Minnesota State Lottery, which is our performance audit. And this is part of our regular cycle of audits. What is somewhat unique, this is happening more and more for the Financial Audit Division, but for this audit, we actually combine both non-IT work and IT work. Sometimes we do those separate. We'll do a non-IT audit, and then we'll do an IT performance audit. But in this case, we thought it was good to combine the two. So the Minnesota State Lottery was established in 1989, and it's responsible for operating the Minnesota Lottery. The lottery contracts with more than 3,000 retailers, and those are throughout the state of Minnesota in places such as gas stations, convenience stores, and in grocery stores. The tickets are sold by these retailers for the multi-state lotto games such as Powerball and Mega Millions, and then for lotto games sold only in Minnesota such as Go for 5 and Pick 3, and then also scratch games that are only sold in Minnesota. The net proceeds from the ticket sales are deposited into the state's Environmental and Natural Resources Trust Fund, and then also into the general fund. Though the lottery is a state government agency, the Minnesota statutes exclude the lottery from minutes technical management policies and oversight, which is kind of fits into the overview that you received earlier today. So a lot of all of the executive branch agencies are technically under minute, but some of our constitutional offices, the lottery, and some other entities have their own kind of IT operations. And in the case here, that is true for the lottery. So therefore, the lottery has to manage and maintain their own information technology operating environment. So from an IT perspective, the lottery's core gaming systems referred to as the central gaming system and as the internal control system. They're important to really understand here. These are the systems that interface with the terminals at the retailer locations. They record all the sales, they record the inventory, they manage the inventory even, and then they validate the winnings. These systems are the backbone of the lottery, and they're critical to the integrity of the lottery games. These systems are developed, and they're implemented, and they're supported by third parties. Controls and security requirements for these are dictated by the Multi-State Lottery Association, which is often referred to as MUSL. And every 2 years, MUSL does do a compliance audit, and the last one occurred in 2023. So the audit objectives and scope were for us to determine whether the Minnesota State Lottery had adequate internal controls, complied with significant legal requirements, had appropriate security administrative procedures and controls to protect the confidentiality, the integrity, and the availability of its systems and the data, and also whether they resolved prior audit findings. Our scope spanned from July 1st of 2021 through December 31st of 2023. So our conclusion regarding internal controls was that we found the lottery generally did not have adequate internal controls. So really the IT portion of what we looked at was focused specifically on IT controls to protect the integrity of the lottery's IT system and the operating environment. And this includes understanding the controls required by muscle, as well as those recommended by best practices. And here it's primarily NIST. So our conclusion regarding the compliance area, which is mainly our non-IT work that we focused on, we found that the lottery generally complied with the significant legal requirements that we tested. However, we do have some findings related to noncompliance in the area of retailer background checks, the retailer contracts, and lost and stolen tickets. We last audited the lottery in 2016, and we issued a report which contained 9 findings. We include a table on page 9 of the report that outlines each of the prior audit findings and their current status. So of those 9 findings, the lottery did resolve 5 of those prior audit findings. That includes those related to IT policies and then checks to ensure that retailers were not lottery employees or family members. And then they also partially resolved 3 findings, which we're going to talk about further in the presentation. And then there was one additional finding that we did not include in the scope of our audit. So for the IT related areas that we tested, we looked at the lottery's gaming systems, we looked at the physical security, access management, network security, vulnerability and configuration management, and then we looked at incident response and disaster recovery. So I'm going to highlight 3 of our IT findings here, which focuses on access management and incident response and disaster recovery. So for system access, the team audited access control mechanisms, including how individuals gain access to various systems and the access that they have. We concluded that the 2016 finding related to system access limitations was only partially resolved here. This is due to the following 2 findings. So the first finding is that the lottery has not performed an annual review on all of its system access granted to employees as required by its policies. And then the second finding, which is a potential effect of the first finding, is that we found that the lottery did not have adequate separation of duties among key IT security administrators. So what does that mean? It means that there's some lottery staff that have broad administrative access throughout all of the lottery. This includes access management, security and monitoring systems, various servers, and more. So because of this, the risk of compromised account or an internal bad actor and the amount of damage that they can do is obviously increased when you kind of have these keys to the kingdom. So our recommendation here is that the lottery needs to perform an annual review of all of its systems and accounts and ensure that there's a proper separation of duties. Our next finding in the IT area is on incident response and disaster recovery. So the lottery has not adequately documented, tested, or trained staff to respond to a significant incident that impacts the IT systems. So currently, the lottery's incident response plan has not been approved by executive leadership. And further, the lottery has not performed detailed training exercises to plan how it would respond. So while there is numerous technical controls in place to increase the resiliency, they have a lot of redundancies that exist. They are not testing and training. That is the necessary to understand if they're adequately equipped to quickly respond to an incident. So our recommendations here is really that they need to improve the documentation of the incident response procedures and the likely impact. They need to ensure that post-incident reviews are done, and that would be like looking at lessons learned. They need to include stakeholders throughout the agency, and then they should perform regular testing and training. So then I'm going to pivot over to the non-IT portion of our work that we did. The team really just looked at the lottery retailers. We really wanted to focus on gaming, so we looked at the lottery retailers, we looked at scratch games. We also looked at employee background checks on temporary employees, and then we conducted a survey of the permanent lottery staff as of June of 2024. So in the non-IT portion, I'm just going to highlight 2 of our findings there. The first finding is related to background checks. So we found that the lottery did not verify that retailers do not have disqualifying convictions. These convictions are listed there on the right side of the slide. Statutes prohibit the lottery from contracting with retailers who have convictions within the previous 5 years. So previously, the lottery's background check included a search of nationwide records. However, now their background checks only include public records, which excludes anything outside of the state of Minnesota. So, for example, this is pretty obvious, but I'll give you an example. So if we have a person who has a gambling-related offense in Wisconsin, and that happened within the last 5 years, that lottery's current process, so their current background check, is not going to catch this conviction. And that means that the lottery would not be aware that this person is disqualified from being a lottery retailer due to that conviction.
Ms. Lyson, if I could stop you.
Sure.
How did that policy get changed internally? Why and who gave it an authorization to do so?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So our understanding from the lottery is that the Department of Public Safety was performing the background checks prior to, I want to say it was March of 2023. They were doing the nationwide checks. And then in 2023, the Department of Public Safety noticed that the lottery was not getting consent from the retailers to perform the criminal background checks. So the Department of Public Safety did not continue with those checks. And the lottery decided to perform those checks on their own using public records. What that excludes is the nationwide convictions. It also includes or excludes the use of social security numbers. The lottery told us that because there are, up to 1,000 or more retailers sometimes for one retailer, they just didn't have the means to obtain those. They just had the administrative burden to obtain those consent forms. It would just be an administrative burden. And so they decided to perform those on their own.
Okay, please proceed.
Sure. Okay, so then our next finding relates to the renewal of retailer contracts. And so here we found that the lottery permitted retailers with expired contracts to continue selling lottery tickets. Statutes and rules prohibit persons other than retailers from selling lottery tickets, and they require a signed contract with the lottery. So continuing to operate as a retailer without a contract violates state law, and it could result in the lottery contracting with a retailer who no longer complied with the eligibility requirements. Here we have two recommendations. The lottery should not permit retailers with expired contracts to sell tickets, and the lottery should implement controls to ensure the retailer contracts are renewed prior to their expiration date. And the final thing I'm going to walk through is a survey that we conducted. So through our audit work and other work, we identified potential concerns with leadership and supervisors. So to determine the extent of those concerns, we surveyed all 146 permanent lottery employees, and we received responses from 126 of those employees, which is 86%, from across all 8 divisions within the agency. Our finding here is that many lottery employees indicated concern about the lottery's workplace culture. We asked questions regarding executive leadership and direct supervisors in the areas such as communicating a clear vision, recognizing employees and their achievements, valuing employee input, sharing information in a timely way, and providing clear direction. So our results show that many respondents had concerns with executive leadership, whereas a majority of survey respondents indicated satisfaction with their direct supervisors. So for example, when we asked about whether executive leaders and direct supervisors value employees' input, we heard from 52 respondents who disagree or strongly disagree that the executive leaders valued their input, whereas 81% of respondents agree or strongly agree that direct supervisors valued their input. We also asked employees whether they received appropriate responses to their informal concerns. We had more than 40% of respondents who had expressed informal concerns to lottery human resource staff or other leaders and supervisors. And so here again, we see that 78% of respondents said they did not receive an appropriate response from executive leadership, and 77% of respondents said they did not receive an appropriate response from human resource. However, again, when we look at direct supervisors, 54% of respondents did say that they received an appropriate response from their direct supervisor. So here our recommendation is that lottery should evaluate agency practices, and they should make changes to promote a more productive work environment. This concludes my presentation. Thank you, and I'm open for any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Lyson. We're going to go to our own lottery retail expert. Representative Joy, I can see just from your face that you have a lot of questions. So, Representative Joy.
Thank you, Chair Nash. Thank you guys for this report. This to me is kind of like in my sandbox. This report you put together is great because I've been a lottery retailer and involved in one of the chains I worked for was the largest lottery seller in Minnesota, out of Moorhead, in the state of Minnesota. So we controlled a lot of lottery, next to the border with the Powerball and everything. It's surprising to me, the findings, when I read what your guys' great work did, especially as a retailer, because if a jackpot goes out or if a major ticket goes out of the $50 or the dollar tickets, we're called within probably an hour saying to pull our tickets, package them, and send them back on Speedy. Speedy delivers all the tickets in when we get the bundle of tickets in, and we get a ticket in that bag that we scan to show the lottery that we received them in place. And so you kind of look at that from the retailer point, and you're like, well, there's a lot of checks and balances here. Then you see there's some issues, with stolen tickets. And as a retailer, when we get those tickets, I think a lot of times when people think when we receive those tickets and they go in our back room until we put them into our drawers to start selling them and activate that pack, we're not charged until the end of that pack sold, and we basically sell them all. So there's always been kind of the question is it the lotteries, the Minnesota Lottery still own that inventory, or does the retailer own that inventory, when it comes to insurance and stuff like that? But it's always surprising to me when you talk about the license contract, and every year when I got to renew my license every year, and I fill out the paperwork and send it in, and comes as an email, and usually our lottery retailers that travel around will remind us. I'm surprised, I sell hunting and fishing licenses too, and when there's issues with that, or if I haven't renewed my license, that machine shuts down. The lottery is very good at when the Minnesota raffle starts up in October and sells 800,000 tickets, and it sells out fast. That little icon comes on our machine, and that little icon disappears on our machine. I'm surprised when retailers haven't renewed their license and it's expired, that their machine just does not shut down. It would surprise me with technology today, as we know, that doesn't happen. So that's another great finding. And the background things is very concerning, that we're not doing background checks because, like it says in here, you can carry a lot of different tickets from a value of $1 to $50. And, when those lottery games go out and you don't return them because the jackpot was sold, I would be concerned that some of those tickets still get sold out on the market, and the jackpot, people are playing a game that's been completely, there's no more jackpots, big jackpots in there. So, yeah, I find this as a great report. I wish the lottery would have been here to talk about more of these checks and balances because, when we, excuse me, receive our inventory, we don't order it. It's not like something we order on our shelf. New games come out every month. 4 new games and the old games go back. They tell us what to take in, what to take out. There's a lot of moving parts, and Speedy Delivery delivers everything. So when you say you leave the office of Roseville and bring all these lottery tickets out in the market, and you're doing background checks on the retailers, hopefully doing background checks in the internal office, you have a delivery system in between there that brings tickets. And there's been incidents where they've called and said, hey, you have not received your batch of tickets. What's going on? Or they've called me and said, you did not return your tickets. And I said, yes, I have my slip here where it was picked up. And they're like, okay, we'll look around for some more. I had heard that. So it's concerning. I think it's a great report. I think I encourage this group here to really look into this, and hopefully what you guys wrote for recommendations, I hope they take seriously and move forward with it because, as retailers, we take it seriously. We do our job, and I would encourage them to even do some checks and balances. If a contract's not renewed, the machine shuts down, and that would affect your business, so you would probably get your paperwork in quick. So, But thank you again for the report. I appreciate it. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Chair Kosnick.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And just looking through the report, I appreciate the work that you do. I don't know what the actual revenue is from the lottery, but in the letter from the executive director of the lottery, they returned almost $200 million to support state services. So we're talking about a lot of money, and that's just money that they return to state services. So the amount of dollars that are generated and run through the lottery system are considerable. Is it my understanding the time frame that you were looking at the lottery operations were from July 1st, 2021, concluding in December of 23, and then you had a report just recently in November, is that right?
Ms. Lyson. Or Auditor Randall.
Yep. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and Representative Kosnick. Yes, our audit scope is July 1st of 2021 through December 31st of 2023.
Chair Kosnick.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, well, thank you. And so that's kind of what I was looking at, but looking at the response from the lottery in the back of the report, as Representative Joy was just talking about, retailers that are have expired contracts, and the lottery, knowing that the auditor was working and looking at systems, on page 2 of 7 of the report, that says the completion date of January 21st, just a couple weeks ago, even though you were looking at their systems for the last couple years, just began shutting off lottery machines to retailers who missed their annual renewal deadlines, is troublesome with the volume of dollars that we're talking, and the potential for any fraud or misfeasance is concerning. So thank you for bringing this report up. I think the lottery, just knowing that you were looking at their systems, but not until just a couple weeks ago, began shutting off some of the terminals is very, very concerning, just from a control standpoint. And look forward to at some point having them provide a better response to the legislature and how they're instituting those controls. But beginning to shut off the retailer terminals does not mean that they are actually shut off, does not mean that they've addressed the situation just in January of 2024. So thank you for shedding light on that, because as we've seen throughout the rest of the Minnesota state enterprise, the volume of fraud and checks and balances needs to be tightened up, because the amount of taxpayer dollars that's not going to where it's supposed to be is a problem.
Auditor Randall, would you like to respond to that?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Representative Kosnick. I just wanted to be really clear about what our scope was and what that means. So while our scope was July 1, 21 through December 31, 23, we did not begin our audit until 2024. So we look back, we're a post-audit shop, and so we were looking back at what happened. So it's not that that we have all been working on this for the past 4 years. It was really, we worked on this in 24 and then provided our findings to them.
Chair Kosnick.
Thank you. I appreciate clarifying that. That is helpful. Did your look back, was there a consistent pattern of not shutting off retailers after their contracts, or is this a new discovery, or was there kind of a pattern of doing that? And in any regard, the lottery, whether they were just made aware of it recently, if it was ongoing practice over a pattern of time, that's the concern. If it's 1 or 2 people, maybe you can talk about the breadth of how many retailers or contracts are expired that are continuing to operate.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Representative Kosnick. Yes, so in I will probably not be able to find it fast enough, but in our sample of retailers, we did find that it was throughout, so it wasn't a new discovery that was later in our audit scope. It was throughout the scope, and that it ranged anywhere from a day to 44 days late. We do know that the lottery did make an attempt to reach out to retailers. However, those attempts were not consistent. And then again, at no time did they stop them from operating. So throughout the audit scope, if at any time they had a contract that was not renewed, all retailers were able to continue operating.
Just I'll follow up with my own question on that. Representative Joy mentioned that when something new comes out, it can actually be pushed to his terminals. Did you find in your audits that the lottery, if there's an instance of a non-renewed license, can they not just turn the machines off remotely, or is that something that apparently, from a technological standpoint, is mystifying to them?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I am hoping that our IT coordinator is going to text me right now to let me know. I apologize that I do not know the answer to that. I can get back to you on that. I would assume that they have the ability to shut that system down, but I don't want to say that without getting confirmation from our IT coordinator.
Sure.
So I apologize.
Thank you. And before I go to Chair Anderson, I'll load up your IT expert who's sitting in an office somewhere probably. So I work in IT. That's my thing. And I will just tell you that what I read in here and what you just said from a permissions perspective is what it's called, someone who has access to more than what they actually should. Those practices are absolutely egregiously lax. So I used to own a company, and I'm in recovery as someone who sold his business. But even as an owner, I did not have access to certain things within the IT backbone of our business because even though I know what I'm doing, I became a liability if I was not the one who was tasked with that function. And it sounds like it was sort of the Wild West in what the lottery is doing. And believe me, that's going to get fixed because I know a guy. And Representative Joy, even though he doesn't know this, is going to be spearheading the effort for this committee to overhauling the lottery from this committee's perspective. The IT practices that you just shared are, if we're going to use a baseball analogy, it's below single A ball. It is bad. Mm-hmm. And when you consider that the lottery is tasked with managing that much money and that much information, to have people who have that many permissions to go across different platforms and have full access to things, that is a joke. So, Chair Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I appreciated and understood that barn analogy, so thank you for that. Just more a general question. This is kind of new to me. So you do your audits and you issue recommendations, and then the agency you're auditing writes a letter back and says, yeah, we agree with point A and point B, but point C we're not quite sure on. And the one thing I haven't heard mentioned this morning is enforcement. Is that in your purview as well, or does your work stop when you do the audit and issue recommendations, and then you hope something good happens after that?
Who would like that one? Madam Auditor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Chair Anderson. It's a good question. We do not have enforcement authority. What we do is we provide information and recommendations to the agency and to you all. And then it is up to the legislature to decide how it wants to take action with respect to our recommendations.
Representative Anderson, nothing? Okay. Representative Joy.
Just a quick one. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So the other part too of this whole lottery thing, when they come in and shut things on and off, they also have a third party that comes and does all the setup, the internet, everything. So that I'd be curious too, how much background check is done with that third party with what's going on in the world with internet hacking and everything like that. And a lot of times, you know, if you have a terminal that goes down, a guy shows up in a van and he's like, I'm here for the lottery to fix the machine, and he does his thing and leaves. And it's kind of like Chair Nash has said, you know, a lot of times in the convenience store industry to protect our credit card data, we have checks and balances and who can go in and correct that. But the lottery just sits on the counter with the backs half time not on the machine, with the everything just kind of open. So yeah, it'll be exciting to look into this stuff. So thank you.
Slyson, would you like to comment on that?
Yes,
I think the third-party vendor is a very interesting question.
Yeah.
From an IT perspective, there's a thing called vendor risk management. And from a vendor risk management perspective, that means that the agent of the state lottery should have been investigated to see whether or not they have best practices that have been deployed. And if they haven't, they should not even be doing business on behalf of the state, because they are a huge vector of attack, if you will. And we're going to have a lot of fun with this. This is why the committee is fun, because we dig into this. And so if you would, maybe comment on Representative Joy and my question. And I think you've given me the high sign that the voice of IT has come down from on high.
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Chair and Representative Joy. To your question, there are muscle requirements to address the vendors. That is not something that we looked at. But as I had mentioned earlier, Muscle does do a compliance audit every 2 years. So we did look at that. I don't remember all of the contents within that audit, but that should be covered through that compliance audit. And then getting back to the question of whether or not they can turn off the system, our IT coordinator is saying that yes, he believes that is correct, that through their internal control system, that they should be able to do that. But they don't, yes.
Good job. Any other member questions? Representative Sexton.
So since we brought up the question of contracts, can you give us an idea of how many contracts they have? Because that was new information I didn't see in the report.
Ms. Lyson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Representative Sexton. There is approximately over 3,000 retailers in any given year, so there is a number of contracts there.
Representative Sexton. Representative Quam.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First, I got to say, it was referenced that the LEC is a very bipartisan. I know that the Ag Committee has tended to be most years extremely nonpartisan. I have not seen a committee that has been more bipartisan than the LEC. And when it was brought up that there might be some findings that some legislators don't agree with, I think what I've observed is the vast majority of the findings, we don't agree that the agency should not have been doing what they didn't do. They're not behaving as they should for our citizens, and that's where the angst has come. Audits, the legislature has a couple ways of producing audits. One is if this committee funded and requested a specific audit, those things happen. Otherwise, every legislator in both chambers gets input for suggested audits, and there's a vote. There's a couple cycles of selecting, and it gets narrowed down to 5. But oftentimes, even ones that aren't used help contribute to improving and focusing the main audits. The hearings that we have, I listened to the questioning. We had some of those same questions, and we pursued them. And there are times of where I've been on a committee in 2018 that heard a presentation of an audit, and because the members asked questions and the agency did not provide the auditors with important data that was publicly accessible from the federal government, a smaller sampling second audit was performed just a few weeks later. So what we can do as members is help facilitate the appropriate things that should be looked at. They audit, then we as members need to look at those results and how can we make statute more clear so agencies actually do what the legislative intent is. So it's a partnership that has been very useful over years, and I hope we can build off of it. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Well, members, I will say, as we're heading into our 10 o'clock end time, for new members or members that have never digested OLA reports, if you look throughout the OLA reports and you're shopping to do a bill that's fun and exciting, there are plenty of things to do in almost every OLA report. I think, once again, Representative Joy is going to be digesting this one completely. But to our new member, Representative Sexton, if you go back and look at some of the OLA reports of the past and that will come out, There are recommendations that there are very often the legislature should do blah, 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 blah. That's a great jumping off point, and I will tell you, even as exciting for those of us that have been around a while, find OLA reports, we don't always get to the point where we can do that because of a bandwidth perspective. There's great opportunity, and the legislative auditor is more than happy to come to your office and explain what that 2 sentences might mean, like the legislature should insert information here. They were more than happy to give you detailed information. In closing, I will say that Ms. Randall's predecessor and Ms. Randall and I have had a great relationship. We do talk over the interim. We talk regularly. They take my phone calls, and if they can't get, they get it right back. Because it is truly a great relationship. And Auditor Randall, you had referenced that your enforcement ability is not there, but the legislature is what should be riffing off of what you throw out there from a findings perspective. So I really wanted to sort of set expectations as to when they make a recommendation, we should be the ones who, in a very good relationship, pick up on that and then begin drafting legislation to move forward. And you know, what I'll say also, Madam Auditor, is even though people don't always like what they read in your reviews, I have yet to meet a legislator that just says, "Oh, this is bad research. I don't agree with this," because the approach that you take so nonpartisanly, you do a nice job. And I'll also say that if you were a baseball umpire, you have a very consistent strike zone, unlike the former baseball umpire Angel Hernandez. Yeah, your balls and strikes are consistently called. If you would like to conclude, Madam Auditor, Ms. Lyson, and then we'll be done for the day.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Members, thanks for your attention today and your good questions. I would just say in closing, we are an extension of the legislature. Again, we're here as a resource for all of you, all of the members in the House and the Senate. So if there's anything that we can help with, please feel free to reach out. That's it. Thank you.
And before we conclude, members, we will be back again on Tuesday, same place, same everything. And with that, we are adjourned.